Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. I think we can get started. Hope everybody's doing well, having a nice Chanukah, enjoying the relatively for December, the beautiful weather. So everybody, hopefully everybody has nice Chanukah, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so we hopefully today we'll finish up Al Hanisim, and then we'll see do a few other things relating to Chanukah, and then please God, next week we'll get back to sort of the beginning of the Siddur, Birchat HaShachar, that we're in the middle of. Okay, so we're discussing Al Hanisim. I'll begin just by saying a point I didn't, just a cute methodological point. I always love to quote in other contexts how the Rambam, the super genius Rambam, besides his absolute unparalleled brilliance in every field under the sun, was an unbelievable organizer. And just his style, if you don't read one word in the Rambam, you just look at his stylistic things. So, apparently this was only discovered like 100 years ago. There were 1,000 chapters in the Rambam, in the Mishnah Torah. It's not a coincidence, for sure. There are 1,000 chapters. Everything is so organized, the structure. So where I mentioned last week that the Rambam puts, I don't think I mentioned this last week. If I did, let me know. But what I did mention is that the Rambam combines Hilchot Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot and Lulav. We always combine Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The Rambam sees sort of the shofar and Lulav as two parallel ways to worship God. That we discussed last week, and Rav Soloveitchik developed that at great length. The shofar is prayer without words. The shofar is approaching God through fear. This we didn't talk about. And the Lulav is approaching God in joy. What's interesting is I don't think I mentioned the Rambam puts the laws of Hallel in Hilchot Chanukah. We discussed that the Rambam puts Megillah and Purim together. Hilchot Chanukah begins in chapter 3. Like he calls it Hilchot Megillah. We mentioned not Purim. It's Megillah, Hilchot Megillah, and Hilchot Chanukah, and they're together because it's a rabbinic law. The authority of Purim and Chanukah are the similar. It's not the details; it's the fact that the rabbis, as we'll get to a little bit later, hopefully, as the rabbis commanded us to follow the rabbinic holiday. So there's one source. It's not the individual mitzvah, it's the rabbinic mitzvah. So he puts it together. So chapter 1 and 2 are about Purim or Megillah, and chapter 3 and 4 are about Chanukah. But in chapter 4, the Rambam discusses all the laws of Hallel, because Chanukah, we say Hallel. How many days a year do we say Hallel? Real Hallel, not the Hallel that we say on Rosh Chodesh. That doesn't count. That's a later minhag. Many people, I think the Sephardim, do not make a bracha on that Hallel. It's a minhag, but okay, we've adopted it. Very nice. The 6 days of Pesach, it's also minhag, doesn't really count. It's only the first day of Pesach. So we only say Hallel 18 days a year, unless you live in, if you live in Israel, you say 18, Kiminyan Chai, right? And if you live in Chutz La'aretz, you get an extra 3 days. You get an extra day on Pesach, an extra day on Shavuos, and an extra day on Sukkot, 21 days. So 8 of those days are on Chanukah. That's like almost half of Hallel that we say all year is on Hallel. And the other 8 days are on Sukkot. So 16 out of 18 days that we say Hallel are Chanukah and Sukkot. The Gemara discusses Hallel in the 3rd parak in Masechet Sukkah, Lulav Hagazul. Masechet Sukkah, when it takes the Lulav, that's what we do. We take the Lulav in the middle of Hallel. Everything is, I always say, the Gemara is edited with such precision. People who learn Gemara younger and they don't learn it again, or they don't learn it properly, the rabbis went on random tangents and whatever they put together. It's so not true. They did go on tangent, but every tangent has a connection. When they edited, the tangents were edited, and they're all connected. So the Ingratitude, the legal and the non-legal sections of Gemara always coincide, right? I mentioned like the stories of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash are in Masechet Gittin about a divorce, this husband and wife divorce, and God and the Jewish people had a mini divorce. So everything is the law, the Aggadata, the beautiful stories of the love of the land of Israel are in Ketuvot, because that Ketuvot, the marriage bond, the love between the husband and the wife, everything is so properly edited. So the laws of Hallel are in Sukkah. That's where they were edited in Masechet Sukkah, and we take the Lulav in Sukkah. So the Rambam should have put Hilchot Hallel in Hilchot Sukkah, but he didn't do that. The Rambam transferred them from Sukkah to Chanukah, linking Chanukah and Sukkot. That's going to be my next Torah that I'm sending out on Chanukah. The many links between Chanukah and Sukkot, which so I won't really go into them much here, but I guess the most famous one is Beit Shammai. Why we light candles 8 to 1, right? Right. Everybody know. I'm sure most people know. I think that we do the Mahadrin min HaMahadrin. You only have to light one candle every night, right? That's it. That's the mitzvah. We have this weird thing by Chanukah, Mahadrin, beautiful the mitzvah, more beautiful the mitzvah. We add, so we go 1 to 8, but that's only Beit Hillel's opinion. Beit Shammai's opinion go 8 to 1. You start big, right? Sort of. I think that's how we all. Believe me, we celebrate the first night of Chanukah. By the 8th night, how many latkes and sufganiyot are you eating? Okay, or how much, Hanisim, whatever, by the 8th night, okay, enough already. But always a big holiday, or Lahavdil, Christmas, it's always the first day, or Lahavdil, Pesach, it's always the first day. You get excited. So that's Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai says, wow, the first day, it diminishes, the holiday becomes less. And Beit Hillel says no. But why Beit Shammai? So the Gemara, one of the reasons it gives, the Gemara has 2 reasons. Parei HaChag, because on Sukkot went in descending order. So that's what I'm going to my next Torah book. But that's but anyways, it's clear there are many connections between Sukkot and Chanukah, and the Rambam puts the laws of Hallel in the laws of Chanukah. Okay, that's just a stylistic point. Okay, let's get back to Al Hanisim. You have in your Siddur. So last week we raised the question we did not answer. I don't think we answered the question. Why Al Hanisim makes only mention of the war and no mention of the miracle, and yet the Gemara does the exact opposite. When the Gemara discusses the Yontif, not really Yontif, when the Gemara discusses Chanukah, it makes no mention of the war. It only mentions the miracle of the oil. So why is that? Does anybody want to suggest some? And I don't know that I have a great answer to this question, but that's why I want to hear your answers. I have a few ideas. I don't know that anybody has a great answer. Anybody? Okay. So I'll start at the Torah Tamima. We've been Torah Tamima who passed away around the 1940s. Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein, the son of the Aruch HaShulchan, always a creative thinker. So the Torah Tamima says that the reason we don't mention the miracle of the oil was, very few people knew about it. Who knew about the miracle of the oil? 8.5 Kohanim who were in the temple knew about it, but the people, what would be in the newspaper would be in the newspaper would be about the war. So they wouldn't. Therefore, they downplayed the miracle of the oil. That's a very okay. Whatever, take it as you'd like. Of course, that may explain Al Hanisim. That may explain why Al Hanisim we discussed the war in great detail. But so why does the Gemara do the reverse? That's very nice. So why in the Gemara is it exactly oil and not? So I thought, and it's connected to this, that davening and learning are 2 different ideas. We say Al Hanisim when we daven. That's in tefillah, b'hoda'ah. That's how we say. We discussed last week, last night's shir in the parsha. Leah discussed why you say Yalav Yavon Avoda by Ritzei, but we do Hallel in Modim. We say Al Hanisim in Modim. It's in the middle of our davening. Learning is very different. I think one of the most commented Divrei Torah ever wrote, and one of the most beautiful ideas, Rav Soloveitchik, I'm sure I've mentioned it over the years. Rav Soloveitchik develops this beautiful theme, how prayer and learning are contradictory mitzvot, right? Prayer requires, as he put it, and I'm not going to say it as well, you have to listen to it. It's so beautiful. Over 2 hours, he explains, prayer is innocence. Only a child can pray. Prayer means I'm totally dependent on God. If you're not dependent, if you don't have needs, you don't pray. We discussed that in our first class. According to the Ramban, if you have no needs, you don't have to pray. That's it. That's simple. Well, why pray? I've got everything I need. That's why modern man finds it hard to pray. I'm one of the reasons. Because thank God we find it hard to pray. Thank God we have a lot of needs. So people prayed a little bit more maybe in COVID. When there's a chas v'shalom, a terrible disaster, World Trade Center, they pray more. But when life is going well, it's hard to pray because we don't have so many needs. Good. That's maybe it's bad that it's hard to pray, but it's good that it's hard to pray, that we don't have so many needs. And only a child can pray and only an adult can learn. A prayer means total dependence on God. I'm a nobody. I'm a nothing. God does everything. And learning is the exact opposite. Learning, you debate and you question, you critique, and you don't accept anything. Who cares who says it? The whole tradition of learning is we don't respect authority. I mean, we respect them, but we don't respect persons. Who cares? We analyze what they say, and Tosfot could argue on Rashi, and goodbye. I don't care. Like, we can argue. That's what we do. Learning is totally different. So I thought that along that theme, prayer is very practical. What do we pray for? Health and wealth and intelligence and peace and justice. We pray for basic things. So the Aleph Beit, if the Maccabim would have lost the war, we wouldn't be here today. That would be the end. Jewish history would have ended, right? That's it, over, Gemarno, finished. So on prayer, we have to pray for very practical things. And learning the Gemara is written hundreds of years later. I'm sure Hanisim, we'll get to Hanisim, maybe written at around that time, or the concept of Hanisim. The Gemara is 600 years later. It's or hundreds of years later included. The Gemara the war is just that was just the means to the end. The goal is not the war. Right? Who cares? We unfortunately we had a fight. We discussed last week. The debate is wearing military uniforms, carrying on Shabbos. So when everybody knows our nations glorified the military. That's wonderful. That's honor. It's clothing. And the Chachamim say, no, that's terrible. That somebody has to be a soldier is a terrible thing. We pray for the end of war. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. We're going to make our what's the pasuk into plowshares, our spears into plowshares, right? So war is a terrible thing. So the Gemara is not interested in talking about the war. The Gemara wants to talk about the legacy of Chanukah, and the legacy of Chanukah is light. Is the legacy of Chanukah is learning. The legacy of Torah is Torah. So that's why perhaps that's why you have that. The difference, or prayer is, how it happened. How did the miracle happen? We beat the Greeks. Why did it happen? What was the purpose? The purpose is the rededication of temples. I don't know. You don't have to like this answer, but it is very interesting. Now, of course, that the total divergence in the way it is presented in the Siddur and the way it's presented in the Gemara. Now, I'm sure everybody knows, on a scholarly point of view, right? None of the early sources make mention of the oil. It was at least. So it's interesting. I told Mark Shapiro, Dr. Shapiro, of course, who speaks every Monday night. So I was rereading his article last night that he wrote a few years ago about. It's already, that in the 19th century, I'm not talking about academics. I'm talking about Rabbanim, who wrote Sfarim, like with long beards, raised the issue that maybe the miracle of the oil didn't really happen. Maybe it was added. I wouldn't teach this to children, but I don't know, maybe should, I'm not sure. But he raises the issue is that maybe the miracle of the oil was added later. We know it's not mentioned in the early sources. That doesn't mean anything. It could be like, as the Torah Mima says, very few people knew about it. It happened in the temple, but that's just an interesting idea. And even if it's true, you know what? I know for many people that may come as a shock and maybe close your ears, whatever. But for other people, it's actually a beautiful thing. We always do that. We always recreate, stories and may put meaning. And then there's the same way midrashim are not meant literally. And the Rambam says that everybody a fool who believes midrashim literally. So too, it could be. I'm not saying it's the same. I'm not saying the miracle didn't happen. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying if one says that, doesn't make you a heretic. It's not one of the 13 principles of the Rambam, but then, and it could be for some people might need that, because for some people who can't believe in this, remember, this is after the period of prophecy, right? So the Gemara says that Chanukah, that Esther is the last of the miracles. So the Gemara says, what about Esther? That's the miracles. What about Chanukah? Or it says, the last of the miracles that made it in Tanakh. Like, Chanukah, as Dr. Sokolow has been talking, Chanukah, there's no book of Chanukah in Tanakh. But the simple reading of the Gemara before that question is, right, there was no obvious miracle. Of course, we Jews believe everything is a miracle. The fact that the sun rises in the morning is a miracle. That's the whole essence of Judaism. Everything is dependent on God. We call it Nes Niglan and Nes Nistar. The Ramban develops that at great length. Everything is a miracle. The fact that that's Birchat Shachar, all of prayer. We thank God. Everything we can do, but miracles that don't work within the realm of nature. The question is, when did they stop? So we know they happened we strongly believe, it seems to evidence they happened in the first temple. But during the second temple, it's a little bit interesting that did you have it? Now, it could be a simple reading, it could be a miracle. They managed to squeeze 8 days when they thought there's one. It's not a miracle. We can all do that. We can all do that. In other words, a lot of things, what we call a miracle. If the Toronto Maple Leafs win the Stanley Cup this year, that'll be a miracle. It's not literally a miracle. It's just a miracle. So it could be the same thing. That's neither here nor there, but I do, I just raised the issue. So, of course, the first rabbi who raised it, you can look on the Sparring blog, who raised it with a long beard, a big gadol. So, of course, he was, people yelled and screamed at him. Obviously, these are not things. And you're right, maybe it's dangerous to teach that to some people. Maybe it's not. Anyway, but in that context, I do want to mention a fascinating article by Danny Sperber in Minhagei Yisrael. I'm just curious, how many people have ever read parts of Minhagei Yisrael? Anybody? Anybody? You can put in your chat bar. I'll try to share Mark's article later. Yeah. So that Minhagei Yisrael, that Danny Sperber, I mentioned his name a number of times. He has he's now in his 80s. Danny Sperber, just in his early 80s. I had the zchut to have him as a teacher when I was in Beit Morashah in 1993, 94. He's ran the Talmud department at Bar Ilan for many years. He's a historian. He's an art historian, in addition to being a tremendous Talmud Chacham. He learned in Hebron Yeshiva for many, many years. He comes from England, and he's a professor. His expertise for years, when he was, a young professor and people hadn't heard of him, his expertise was realia of the Talmud. What did a Roman bathhouse look like? I think I mentioned he gave a whole class once. What did parties? How were parties done in the Roman period? You understand Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, how were invitations sent out, mailed out during the time of Tisha B'Av? Kamsa, Bar Kamsa. That was his specialty. Roman coins and Greek everything, realia. So but he's in so many wide fields. So he wrote this one Press Yisrael, like the Nobel Prize of Israel, the equivalent, 8 volumes, Minhagei Yisrael. So one of his volumes is dedicated totally to Chanukah. It has a whole volume on Chanukah. So it's all on Minhagim, the history of Minhagim, etc. So he quotes here. We know that the temple was Chanukah. The 25th of Kislev. That's it means dedication. Chanu b'kafei, right? I'm sure you've all heard that. They rested on the 25th, kafei, the 25th of Kislev. Now we know the 25th of Kislev has historical importance because it's mentioned in Chagai. Chagai was one of the 3 prophets. The transition between prophecy, perhaps miracles, that's the question. Do miracles end with prophecy? But the transition from the prophetic period to the rabbinic period happens at the beginning of the Second Temple period. Rav Soloveitchik developed that at great length. Rav Soloveitchik was a big, small c conservative when it came to our Siddur. He didn't he didn't add anything to our Siddur. He felt it's inappropriate. We don't have the right. We don't agree with him. Even Rav Lichtenstein didn't agree with him in a sense. You can't change Nachem because we have a state of Israel. You can't add piyutim, can't add lamentations for the Holocaust. Only people who wrote, like in Ruach HaKodesh with prophecy, could write prayer. And that's a rough basis that the Gemara says that the Amidah, we spoke the first class, I believe. The Amidah was done by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, the time of Ezra, when they rebuilt the Second Temple. And among them were Kelman Nevi'im. The Gemara makes a point. The Anshe Knesset, among the 120, were a few prophets, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, Mordechai maybe is Malachi, right? Esther and Mordechai, right? So the Gemara, Rav Soloveitchik felt, the Gemara is pointing out that only a prophet can really compose a prayer. So that view hasn't really been accepted, even within the top students of Rav Soloveitchik, but it's a very interesting idea. And prayer, it has to be written with great, not anybody can write a prayer. But so anyway, why am I saying that? So why was I saying that for a second? Now I forget what was my connection. But anyway, so Danny Sperber, if you can remind me why I was saying that, that'd be great. But okay. Anyways, but what does he say? So he talks about Chanukah. Yes, I know. The 25th of Kislev was a special day. So Chagai, one of the prophets who comes back to help build the Second Temple, dedicates the temple the night of the 24th, the 25th of Kislev. Why? So that again, Chanukah. So there's something special. So it makes sense. So you can say it's just an amazing coincidence that 300 years later, that the third temple, so to speak, right, the rededication of the second temple is also on the 25th of Kislev. But Danny Sperber raises, not him, he quotes many problems with that explanation. First of all, what do you think they walked into the temple? Right. So why did the miracle last 8 days? Because it took them that long to get the oil. They didn't have enough oil, so they had to get new oil. The people are impure. That's a week. Till you go to mikveh after you're impure for at least a week or they had to travel and get the olives and squeeze them. It took a week. So that's why we needed eight days of the holiday of Chanukah. No, what about the altar? What about it? What do you think the Greeks? They think the temple looked like normal. We know from all our sources, the Greeks, they rampaged the temple. They put in pagan idols. They totally destroyed the temple. What's going on here? So he quotes, it's obvious, just nobody reads these sources. So he quotes in Megillat Ta'anit, which is our source of Chanukah. Remember, the Gemara comes, Megillat Ta'anit was the scroll written that listed all the holidays that used to be celebrated during the Second Temple period. They were all abolished. That's what we spoke about last week. Why did we retain Chanukah? Chanukah doesn't make any sense in the modern period. There's no temple. There's no Jewish sovereignty. So that was our discussion last week. So in Megillat Ta'anit, it actually says that the Maccabim came into the temple on the 23rd of Cheshvan. And he has a whole 20-page article here explaining that basically what happened is they had their spears, because the Gemara discusses what did they light with. The Gemara is about Rav Zevin. He begins by quoting Rav Zevin's article on Chanukah with about 28 questions on Chanukah. On the story, it doesn't make sense. Weren't they tamei? Weren't they impure? The whole story didn't make sense. All the questions that Gedolei Yisrael, the great sages, have asked on this little passage about Chanukah. So each one has this answer, and then the question, the answer. So Danny's just when you have 25 questions on something, maybe the whole thing, like there's you can answer each individual question, but maybe there's a whole new way to look at the whole idea. And so he says, because one of the things is, how did they light? It's very nice that the oil was pure. Nobody had touched the oil. It was a sealed container, right? The whole idea is that if somebody touches it, the oil becomes impure. But how did the Maccabim touch? How did they light the oil? Where did they get the oil from? So they said they lit it with their spears, their war spears. But how did that work? It's made of metal. Oh, they turned it upside down. So he had developed al-rega lachad. Basically, he says they came into the Beit HaMikdash, the 23rd. They turned over their spears. They lit the menorah immediately. And that's when the miracle happened, 8 days. It lasted, they lit. And then during that time, they got menorah, but it took them a month or two to clean up the temple. The temple wasn't ready for service. The temple wasn't ready, completed. So what they did was then when they're going to have the dedication, that was the 25th of Kislev. They dedicated it on the 25th of Kislev. The miracle, and this is pretty clear. It's almost black and white. It's not exactly black and white, but it's because it says they came in on the 23rd and they lit the menorah. Like I say, the early sources don't mention the miracle of the oil. But so the assumption is that's when the sort of oil story happened on the 23rd of Cheshvan. And then it took them a month to clean up. And then, okay, if we're going to dedicate it, let's dedicate it on the 25th of Kislev, because that is great significance. Everybody does that. You dedicate something, in Canada, we'll make it on July 1st, become the member of the Order of Canada on July the 1st, because that's a special day. So you do things, we push up. The Gemara even says that there's a famous midrash that the Mishkan and built in the desert was ready on the 25th of Kislev. But they didn't want to dedicate it on the 25th of Kislev. They wanted to dedicate it on the 1st of Nisan, a special day. Because the 1st of Nisan, a year earlier was when they began leaving Egypt. That's when God comes to Moshe, set up a calendar. In 2 weeks, you're going to leave Egypt. So the 1st of Nisan, Rosh Chodeshim, right? Nisan is the first one. That's the beginning of the Exodus. That's the beginning of Jewish history. So the 1st of Nisan is a really important date. So we wanted a link. That's how the Medrash says. The Medrash said, we wanted the Exodus. What's the goal of the Exodus? To build a Mishkan. That's what the Ramban says. Right? If we were editing the Chumash, the story, the boring parsha, Truma, Tetzaveh, Vayakhel, Pekudei, that belongs in Vayikra. What's it doing in Shmot, right? Shmot is the story to the Exodus. And why do we have the Exodus? To get the Torah at Mount Sinai. That's how most people know. The Ramban says that wasn't the Torah was just a stop on the way. Of course, it's important, but the goal is to build the Mishkan, was to build a tabernacle to God, that house to breathe. So therefore, the Mishkan has to be in Sefer Shemot. The Exodus only ends when they build the Mishkan. So the Exodus began on the 1st of Nisan. So therefore, they wanted to dedicate the Mishkan a year later. It's a beautiful idea. That's what the Midrash says. So the Midrash then continues, but that's not fair to Chanukah. That's not fair. The 25th of Kislev felt left out. So God said, don't worry. Don't worry. In another 1,500 years, the 25th of Kislev will become a special day. That becomes the day of Chanukah. And therefore, the second temple is dedicated on the 25th of Kislev. We don't know why. There's no reason that, it has to be dedicated on some day. But that they would rededicate it would make then a lot of sense. But it doesn't. The oil and the miracle of the oil and the dedication of the temple don't have to be at the same time. And I'll just show you. Perhaps let's go to our sources a little bit. So if you read the Talmud, what am I doing here? Wrong source. Okay, this is a sparring block. This is not the article, but I'll try to get you the article. Where am I looking here? Here it is. My Chanukah, we did this Gemara a little last week. B'kapei b'Kislev Yom the Chanukah Tameh. On the 25th of Kislev, Chanukah is 8 days. Why? Because when the Greeks entered in the temple and the Beichash wanted why, the Gemara doesn't say this happened on the 25th of Kislev. We 25th of Kislev is when we dedicated the temple. Why? Because the Yavanim went in and they only found one, blah, blah, blah. And then Lashana Cheret in another, remember, we discussed last week, Lashana Cheret for our time. But Lashana Cheret also means, in other words, in another time it became a holiday. So another time you don't have to do it on the first day they came in. What's the date? Lashana Cheret, when they make Chanukah later, what date are we going to choose? So they're going to choose the special date. Didn't have to be the same day. Okay, that's you can take it or leave it, but that's perhaps such an interesting thing. That's always reading the sources, whatever. It's very interesting. It answers a lot of questions because it's very nice that they could light the menorah, but the menorah is only a small part of what goes on in the temple if the Mizbeach was destroyed, right? The Gemara, the Mishnah in Chagiga talk about that. What did they do when everybody came to Israel to the Beit HaMikdash on Yamim Tovim? They were afraid things would get tamei. It takes time to fix things. Okay, let's move on. Let's discuss a general point of Hanisim, and then I will get to some of the specific points. So, how many people were in Menachem Levi's class on Sunday? I only say because I was going to quote this Gemara last week, and I say, no, I'll do it next week. Of course, he quoted this Gemara already, but I hope, whatever. So, let me quote the Gemara, and I'll just maybe say something he didn't say, and I'm sure not everybody was at the class, and even if you were, maybe a review is always good. So, before I start, okay, so Chanukah is all Hanisim is all about gratitude. We talk about Halal and Hodah. So, who's the first person to have ingratitude in the Torah? Who's the first person who was didn't have any?
Leah.
No, Leah had gratitude. Who is the first person who showed ingratitude? I'm sorry?
Oh, ingratitude.
Who?
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek. Why? Melchizedek, he came to Melchizedek Melech Shalem Hotzi Yechem V'Yain. I think he showed gratitude. The king of Sodom didn't. The king of Sodom didn't show any gratitude. Lot didn't show any gratitude. He was saying we don't hear a word from him. Right. Sodom doesn't show any gratitude. Right. Melchizedek probably did, I think. But you don't have to go so far. Believe me, it doesn't take long. Right. If I ask you, who was the first murder? How long did it take for the first murder? Didn't take very long. Took a half a generation. I don't know if generation one is Adam or Cain and Hevel. I'm not sure how you want to count it. Who were born, as babies. So it didn't take long for murder. How long did it take for ingratitude? Took less time. Less time is took the 1 day. Adam. So that's a beautiful comment of Rashi. Adam and Chava are, enjoying the non-apples, the etrog, whatever fruit they were eating, the four views of the sages, but nobody says it was an apple. Okay, fine. The etrog, the olive, the etrog, the date, or the fig. I think those are the four opinions in Midrashim. We obviously, nobody knows and we don't care. It's all symbolic. other words, what does the etrog represent? What does the zayit represent? Obviously, that's what the rabbis are debating. They're not telling historically what he ate. Anyway, so, and obviously for Christianity, I don't know, the apple's important. I don't exactly know why, but whatever. So, so what happens? God approaches man, and what does Adam say? It's her fault. It's her fault. And what does he say? Ha'isha asher natata li, the woman who you gave me. Actually, he was blaming God. God, you created a wife, Ezer connected. Your fault. You shouldn't have given me. You wanted me not to sin. Don't create woman. Asher asher natata. What can I tell you? I'm just quoting Adam. Don't get upset at me. And what does Rashi say? Kan kafar kafui betova. He denied goodness. He showed ingratitude because God created woman to be a partner with man. And it was an act of great kindness. And Adam turned around that act of kindness, and he turned it into, he totally didn't have any gratitude. So Rashi says, Mikan kafui betova. He is the person who, the beginning of ingratitude begins with Adam Harishon. But the Gemara in Avodah Zarah is going to tell us a story now that shows he did tshuva. He did tshuva, and we don't know. The Torah doesn't really tell us what happened, And he basically begins to show gratitude. So we'll quickly go the story now. I'm sure many of you, it's a familiar. I don't know if it's. You'll let me know if it's a familiar story. It was. I think it really was Yoel Ben Nun who popularized this Gemara, because who learns Avodah Zarah? Daf Yomi, once in 7.5 years, you learn Avodah Zarah, and then you don't pay attention to it because it's all about idolatry and everything like that. Let's see, is it here? Yeah, Avodah Zarah. So we know Avodah Zarah, this becomes a big topic. I'll just say one introductory comment. Of course, we do not consider any, if we considered the Christians or the non-Jews who live among us with our idol worshipers, boy, life would be next to impossible to live. You couldn't go shopping any Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, perhaps Monday, Tuesday, when it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. That's a debate, because you can't go shopping 3 days before their holidays to buy from them. All kinds of laws, how to go away with idolaters, right? And that's the context. If Avodah Zarah begins, you're not allowed to do business with an idolater. I mentioned this last week, I think, because he's going to praise his God. He's very thankful. He has gratitude. People understood. So you make a good business deal, you thank God. You make a business deal, you give stock, and the pagans understood that too. The pagans would go to their church and say thank you to their gods. So we don't want to participate in their business deals. The pagans are going to go worship 3 days before their holidays. So we have to know when their holidays are. So that's calendar. So Eilika Eideim, these are the holidays, and calendar, right? So the Gemara says, what's calendar? Well, what is this holiday? So the Gemara says, Adam saw, I won't go through the whole story quickly. When Adam sinned, you can see it in English, he said, assuming Adam was created in Tishrei, which is what this Gemara assumes. We know there's another opinion of Gemara that Adam was created in Nisan, so this Gemara wouldn't work. This Midrash is going to the opinion that man was created in the fall. In the fall, the days are getting shorter. We know in September they get shorter by half an hour a week. Shabbos gets shorter by 15 minutes, but that's in the afternoon. In the morning, the sunrise is also later. Yeah, pretty good at noticing that. People who lived with no lights, they were very attuned to nature. So the days are getting shorter. And how does God create the world? God creates the world with light. Darkness means the end of the world. And therefore, Adam said, the world's coming to an end. God said, I would die. If I eat from the fruit, I'm going to die. I'm going to die now. God's bringing the end to the world. And this is the death that was sentenced upon me. So he fasted. He fasted and he prayed to God. I did terrible things. Then he saw the days are getting longer. December 21st, days are getting longer. Beautiful. Olam kiminhago. Minhago shalolam. This is the way the world works. No. God wasn't punishing me. I didn't know there were seasons. Now there's seasons. The days are going to get longer. So what do most people do when that happens? That's it. They go on with their life. Right? We're always there. Everybody knows they pray. And then when it happens, you forget about what you said. You forget about, very good. So Adam could have shown ingratitude. He could have totally forgotten about that. But what does the Gemara say? No. He now before he made 8 days of fasting, halak basa shmoni yamim, he made 8 days of praise to God. Lashana acheret, remember that language? We had that by Chanukah. In the following year or in future years, asan le'elul. So the pagans made it a holiday and the Jews made it a holiday, right? Adam is the father of all mankind. Hu kavam l'shem shamayim. Adam made it as a holiday for God. Hey, they did it for idolatry. So this Yom Nun claims this is the origins of Chanukah. We spoke last week about light. We mentioned the concept of light, but it really comes from Adam Harishon, who here he does basically tshuva for his sin. He shows gratitude. And of course, it's not a coincidence that between December 25th and January 1st, there's 8 days. And that's right. And we know historically, and the Rabbi Leipzig, I think, was talking about this, right? Christianity basically took Christmas and took it from a pagan holiday, made it a religious holiday. We did that too, according to the Rambam. According to the Rambam, we took sacrifices, which the Torah doesn't really want, but we have no choice, and we had no choice, so we turned in something good. That's the Rambam do. That was quite controversial, of course, but that's how. So they took a pagan holiday and Christianized it. We always do that. We take part of our culture and we make it into something holy. Maasur, the Maasur tune is some German beer tune. Everybody, we do that with music. We do that in a lot of things. We kosher it, right? Yidden, when they don't play that anymore. That's some tune from, I don't know, where's that tune from? You'll know. It's a totally non-Jewish tune. That's a question. Halachically, whatever, can we take these tunes and use them in our prayer service? This was discussed at great length by halachic poskim, many of whom were very upset at the practice. Felt it was very cool. But I remember Rabbi Gemara here in Toronto gave a shiur a few years ago, and it was amazing. We know that Mark had mentioned this on our trip to Italy. Apparently, some of the rabbis, or some of the leaders of the community in Italy would go to the church service so they could pick up music because they thought their music was very beautiful. And they would then take that music and transport it, or maybe transform it a little bit, maybe, and turn it into Jewish music. This is in sources in Halakha. Many poskim were appalled by that. And others, whatever, it's just interesting discussion. But of course, we pick up things from the culture and we kosher it. Sometimes it's a great idea. Sometimes it's beautiful. So there you have really the origins of Chanukah, light, the festival. And of course, we understand. And it's not a coincidence that we're on the 25th of Kislev and they're on the 25th of December. And it's not a coincidence that they light outside. That's where we're supposed to light the Chanukah and Persumenis. I mean, the parallels are so obvious. You have to be like, it's impossible to miss the parallels, and that's fine. What's whatever. That's the way it is. We make distinction. Havdalah is to make fine distinction. There also, we mentioned many times, also from Rabbi Gemara. I love to quote his idea from Rav Kook, Avodah Zarah. Idolatry is avodah. Avodah is one of the three pillars the world stands on. Avodah, worship of God. Idolatry is worship of God. It's Zarah. It's off kilter a little bit. So the Torah doesn't want it. You make a little mistake, God forbid, on an airplane, it's a disaster. You make a little bit of a mistake in Avodah Hashem, it's Avodah Zarah. It's a disaster. But as the Rambam writes, quoted many times, Avodah Zarah began as a mistake, an honest mistake. They meant well. Anyways, that's interesting. The Meiri redefines Avodah Zarah. That's how I said earlier, we don't consider the people that we live among to be idol worshipers, even if they bow down to idols. We don't call them idol worshipers because the Meiri in the Middle Ages, he wasn't the only one. He redefined idolatry, which makes a lot of sense, right? Why does the Torah? Why does the Torah say you have to believe in God? It's not so much theological. According to the Rambam, it's theological. We have to have theology, belief in God. But according to the many others, and it seemed to me, the simple reading of Torah is it's a moral obligation. Belief in God leads to moral behavior. If you don't believe in God, eat, drink, and be merry. For tomorrow you die. Might as well enjoy life. Why do you have to sacrifice? Why do you have to have limitations, discipline? But if you believe in God, that's how the Torah always presents. What does Avram say? Abimelech, what are you doing? There's no fear of God here. You're going to just rape the woman, right? So in the Torah, I think not like the Rambam's view. It's not that that's wrong, but the emphasis on the Torah and belief in God is not theology, it's morality. And therefore the Meiri says any nation that even if their worship of God is theologically incorrect and they believe that God has a body or there's more than one God, but as long as they have moral codes, that's not idolatry. So he redefined idolatry from a theological sin to a moral sin. Okay. Let's get to Al Hanisim. I see I'm not going to get to the other stuff I wanted to do because that's the way it works every week. What can I tell you? Okay. Al Hanisim. Let's start. We did the Al Hanisim part last week. Okay, who wants to translate that? Obviously, I'm asking you because there's a huge debate. Who wants whatever you say is going to be right, okay? It'll also be wrong. I mean, it depends who you ask. Whatever you're going to say, some are going to tell you right, some are going to say you're wrong. Who is the Kohen Gadol?
The great priest, the important priest.
I know which one. Excellent. But who was the Kohen Gadol? Matityahu or Yochanan? Who cares? But we'll get.
Oh no.
In the days of Matityahu, let's reread.
Yochanan.
In the days of Matityahu, son of Yochanan, the high priest.
The son and the father are switched around.
So who's the high priest?
Yochanan.
Everybody agree it's Yochanan?
Well, that's what it says.
According to the Rambam, it's Matityahu. No, what do you mean?
Matityahu is the Kohen Gadol.
In other words, who is Matityahu? Is the son of Yochanan, and he's a Kohen Gadol.
No,
not the son of Yochanan, the Kohen Gadol. It's Matityahu. I'm Jay Kelman, a Yisrael. So so Jay Kelman was Matityahu Yochanan. That's how they call themselves. So the Ben Yochanan is just his name, and then Kohen Gadol is describing who he is. That's how the Rambam reads it. That's how many people read it. The problem is nobody ever heard of a Matityahu Kohen Gadol. Have you heard of a Yochanan Kohen Gadol? What do you know about Yochanan Kohen Gadol? I think from what I understand, what I was looking up, this is a debate in rabbinic sources and it's a debate in academic sources. It's not clear. It's not clear because we can speak in language. Of course, it could be Matityahu, Ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Depends where you put the comma. I don't know how Koren does it because they put a comma in both places. In the days of Matityahu, comma, son of Yochanan, comma, the high priest. So to me, that sounds like Matityahu is the high priest because they should have said, I'm sorry, Yochanan's high priest. Otherwise, it would have been in the days of Matityahu, son of Yochanan, the high priest. No, so they believe Matityahu is the high priest because with that comma distinguishes between Yochanan and the high priest. Who cares? But that's just what I don't know what Art Scroll does. I don't know. And
in Megillus Chashmonaim, you would understand that it would be Yochanan as the Kohen Gadol because Yochanan approaches Bagris. He approaches Antiochus.
Yeah. So first of all, there's a big question: who is this Yochanan? So most people assume it's John Hyrcanus, who's the son of Shimon HaMaccabi. He was the one who established really the Chashmonim Maccabi. Yehuda Maccabees killed; they're all killed. He establishes the Chashmonim dynasty from around the year 140 BCE till Herod takes over in 37 BCE. And of course, we're not going to get into so much now, but that was a huge debate. We discussed last week how the Rambam discusses the history of Chanukah, right? So we discussed why does the Rambam discuss the history of Chanukah by no other holiday? Some say that the Rambam discussed it because he thought what they did was correct. Remember, we discussed the problem is the Chashmonaim took over the religious leadership, right? We discussed Judaism believes in separation of powers. Mixing religion and politics is bad for politics and worse for religion, right? Jonathan Sachs's beautiful line. So what they did was terrible. And the Rambam said, the Ramban criticized him. Then Parshat Vayechi, Lo Yasur Shevet Mi Yehuda. When Yaakov gives the blessing that the monarchy should be through the tribe of Yehuda, who gave gratitude. Yehuda, right? Melech has to have gratitude. We're afraid there's too much power. So the Chashmonaim were Kohanim, they had no right to usurp it. And the Ramban says, no, they're exceptions to the rule. What can you do? There was nobody else. They had to do it. So that's a debate between the Rambam and the Ramban, that Chashmonaim act properly. So many people assume Yochanan was the son. Now, I looked in the Iyun Tefillah, it's right here, one of the Otzer HaTefillah, which is a standard commentary on the Siddur. So he says something I can't believe it's true. I mean, I think many of the rabbis, they didn't know historical. First of all, they didn't have historical records like we do, and many of them were not aware. He claims he's the son of Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik in Pirkei Avot, Hayam Misharei Anshe Knesset Agdola, right? Ezra is the founder of Anshe Knesset Agdola. The end, it's unclear how long did the period of Anshe Knesset Agdola last, but for sure, by the time of Alexander the Great, by 323, we know in rabbinic sources, Shimon HaTzadik is in discussion with Alexander the Great. I think Alexander the Great conquers in 323 BC. I may be off by a few years. So Shimon HaTzadik is living in the 4th century. Chanukah is in 165. It's a little bit hard to see him as obviously his son, Yochanan Kohen Gadol. So in Sefaria and in the Steinzels, they always identify him as the son of Shimon HaMaccabi. That's just interesting, but I just want to point out we have in the Talmud Yochanan Kohen Gadol at least 3 different times. We won't go through all of them, but just let me show you one of the sources of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Presumably, it's the same person. But it could be there's more than one, like King Louis the 14th, whatever, they're King George. I mean, they're popular names, so it's very, very likely that there was more than one Yochanan Kohen Gadol. It doesn't really matter. It's just kind of interesting. I mean, maybe it does matter. I don't know. Okay, so here, I just want to take you to the first half of a famous Gemara. This is the Gemara in Yuma. Yuma, of course, means the day, Yom Kippur. This is where Yom Kippur is talked about. So this is where the Yuma 9b, I'm on Yuma 9a. Yuma 9b is the famous Talmudic passage that the second temple was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam. The first temple was destroyed because of idolatry, adultery, and murder. And the second temple, the Gemara says the Jewish people were studying Torah and doing good deeds. Why was it destroyed? Sinat Chinam, to teach us that Sinat Chinam is worse than idolatry, adultery, murder. I know it's worse because the first temple was rebuilt after 70 years. The second temple, we're still waiting. So the Gemara, that's later on in the discussion. So earlier in the discussion, the Gemara here, Zeh Mikdash Sheni, the Gemara assumes the second temple stood for 420 years. We know that his scholars assume it stood for about 600 years. Doesn't really matter now. I don't know. That's a 586 BE, 420, or whatever. That's a whole, we've mentioned that history before. How do you resolve that? Or can you resolve it? Okay. So the Gemara says like this. There were only, I think, 18 Kohanim Gedolim. I think that's what the Gemara says, right? Yirat Hashem Tosiv Yamim. The fear of God adds days. And the Shnat Rishaim and the years of the righteous take them off. So that's Mikdash Rishon. What is the fear of God? Interesting. The first temple, they worshiped God. Maybe they did it idolatry, but they worshiped God. So for 410 years, and there were only 18 high priests. It's interesting. The second temple stood long, only 18 high priests. The second temple had more than 300 priests. More than 300 priests. And we know every year, everybody, they used to die because they would buy the kahuna. They weren't worthy. They would die in Yom Kippur. We mentioned the Olympic survey. If an Olympic athlete, they did a survey, could take a pill, he won't get caught, a steroid, he'll win a gold medal, but he'll die in 10 years. How many would take it? Way more people would take it because that's their whole life, win an Olympic gold, medal. What do they care? I mean, now, what do they care if they'll die in 10 years? So it's that's what people wanted the kuna. It was a risky job. But who cares? The honor of being Kohen Gadol. That's how people are. What can I tell you? So the Gemara says 300. It was really, it was even quicker. They were dying even within the year. Same way, 40 years of Shimon HaTzadik. See, here's where you get a little bit where Yochanan Kohen Gadol is the son of Shimon HaTzadik, and maybe there was 40 years of Shimon HaTzadik from Pirkei Avot, who was the Kohen Gadol, and 80 years of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. So that's already 120 years. The whole temple is 420 years. Then another 10 years, and so then whatever it's then that's less than a year. So here I'll just do the you can say here. We can do on Sefaria where they do them on the English. Where we go here, 40 years. Yochanan the high priest. So you can see it on the side here. Yochanan the high priest. John Hyrcanus. You see what they've written in the Sefaria writes. I can't see it, but was the son of Shimon the Chashmonim and succeeded him as high priest. Later, he fought several wars against the Syrian Greeks and local enemies, etc. So this is it. This is what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says he seduced, he became a Sadducee. So I don't know Gemara here, but the Gemara famously says that Al Tamin Ba'atzmacha Yomadcha, right? Also, but don't believe in yourself till the day you die. You have to always be on guard. Right? Yesh konel l'mo b'shachad. You can acquire your world in 1 minute. The Roman executioner who jumps in with Rav Meir's father-in-law, Rav Chananya ben Trajan, as they're burning him, right? That famous story. You can acquire your world in 1 moment, do an act. You can also lose your world in 1 moment. Yesh konel l'mo b'shachad. Yesh ovedo l'mo b'shachad. So Gemara says you always have to be nervous. 80 years. And what's the best example? Yochanan Kohen Gadol was for 80 years the high priest, and then he became a Tzduki, then became a Sadducee. Of course, to the end of the Second Temple period, that was the great debates between the Sadducees and the Tzdukim, which actually leads me to another answer, if I may go back to my original question, why this Gemara leaves out the battle. right? We discussed that the learning is more important toward the representation of Chanukah. The purpose of Chanukah is much more important than the practical aspect of how it happened. It could be, this is my own, I just made this up last night. What do I mean I made this up last night? I was writing a Dvar Torah on Chanukah that hopefully I'll send out after Shabbos. And it's basic. And as I was writing, this idea came to me. I don't know if it's true. I haven't seen it anywhere. So you can ignore it. But perhaps one of the reasons is that the rabbis didn't want to mention the war because much of the war was a civil war. The war against the Greeks was like, I don't want to say it was a sideshow, but we know historically the Mityavnim were, they were a little bit, the Maccabim, they were a little bit zealous, Mila Shem Elai, like the Levim. Kohanim tend to be zealous. That's the character trait. Moshe Rabbeinu, Levim, they were zealous, and the Jews who were too Hellenistic, they killed them. They killed him. It wasn't so nice. It wasn't. Well, I'm not even asking it justified, not justified. But the point being, perhaps the rabbis wanted to totally de-emphasize that. They didn't want any of these guys. I don't know. It's a total suggestion. I throw it out there. If anybody has any critical comments or if it makes any sense, I'd love to hear. But they wanted to de-emphasize war in general, to de-emphasize the war, but especially this war, because this war was as much a civil war as it was war against the Greeks, and that was bad. We know the Stukim and the Prushim, we know, so that was a terrible time. Luckily, I mean, during this Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai and Stukim, we know his nephew was the leader of the extremists, the Biryonim, who were fighting the Romans to the death, and they burnt the food, right? We know that the Talmud tells us that there was enough food to withstand the Roman siege for years, and the extremists burnt the food, so they'd have to fight. Right, they had that in Greek also. He burned the way to get back to the island, so you force them to fight because they have no choice. So these were terrible things going on. So perhaps because of that, the rabbis didn't want to mention. Anyways, but Yochanan Kohen Gadol is the person who is perhaps it's the same one. That's the question. Is this Yochanan Kohen Gadol who became a Tzduki? Is he the one in Al Hanisim? So the Torah T'mima says yes, it's the same one. So that's fascinating. I don't, we know, but I would think not. But it depends who it is. But because if it's the Shan of Shimon HaTzadik, if it's the same one, it's probably a different. But let's put it to you this way. I think there are serious commentaries who hold that Al Hanisim begins by discussing Mattatyahu, the son of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. And this Yochanan Kohen Gadol was a Kohen Gadol for 80 years, and he became he went off the derech, as we would say today, whatever word you want to use. He became a Tzduki. He disagreed. So that's a fascinating thing, but we have that all the time. The children, the grandchildren, very different from the parents. So that's just interesting. Okay. So we'll talk about a few ideas. When the evil Greek Empire, the Seleucids, they weren't all evil. The Rambam loved Greek culture. There wasn't, but this particular Greek Empire, Antiochus IV, right? Alam Chayisrael lahashkicham Toratecha. So that's forget the Torah. They didn't want us not to study Torah. That's bad enough. We should forget the Torah. That's a lot worse. Got to burn the books. Have no remnant of Judaism. It's very harsh. There's a prohibition that we can laugh. I can laugh. Maybe I should cry. There's a prohibition to forget Torah. That's why some people don't learn. Because they say they're going to forget what they learned. It's better not to learn because I'm not allowed to forget. So the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says that's only if you try to forget. If you caught, in other words, I'm sorry I got a Jewish education. I'm going to work hard to get all that stuff out of my head. Or perhaps if you never review, maybe that's, I don't know, that's a slightly different level. But the Pentishkach, don't forget, we know Zachor is that's the famous book of Yerushalmi. I think the beautiful book, Zachor, remember, right? The Sheish Sekurat, remember Shabbat, Zachor Yom HaShabbat, remember Sinai, remember Miriam, remember Amalek. We have to remember, we have great memory. Torah is all about memory, linking us to the past, right? That's what it's all about. So the Greeks didn't just not want us to learn, they wanted to eradicate Torah, hashkicham. And we know the Greeks they had nothing against Jews, it was all against Judaism. That's, of course, the famous distinction between Purim and Chanukah. Purim is an attack on Jews. We don't care how religious they are or not religious, irrelevant, the Nazis. And Chanukah is an attack on Judaism. Embrace Hellenism. beautiful, as many Jews did. And as the difficulty, right? We do embrace, I think we discussed this, we embrace much of Greek culture. We do. Greeks brought many great things to the world. But anyways, and to make us violate chukei ritzonecha. So what does chukei ritzonecha mean? So chukim are basically those laws that rationality escape man. I don't like it when people say the chukim have no reason. They have a reason. Even if it's Yeshayahu Leibowitz's reason, just discipline to God, even if it has no inherent reason, has a reason discipline to God. But I think it's more than that. They have a reason. They're just very hard for humans to understand. God has a reason. God doesn't capriciously do things, just random acts. So we should, Yeshayahu Leibowitz believed that God just wants us to stand on our head. We stand on our head. The things that don't, whatever, we just do what he wants. That's part of developing our religious fidelity to God. It's following things we don't understand. That's not wrong. We have that, but it's not that there's no reason. So I think the chukim are ritzonecha. The chukim most express the will of God. I give charity, so I can give charity because it's the will of God. It's a mitzvah, and I can give charity because I'm a nice guy. I'm an atheist, but I'm a humanist, and I want to help you. Both are beautiful reasons, and that's why there's no bracha on giving charity. We don't give it, just don't do it because God said it. You're not my mitzvah. We discussed that in the past. You're not my way to do a mitzvah. I give charity because it's the right thing to do. I don't keep kosher because it's the right thing to do. I keep kosher because God commanded. What's wrong with not we have a famous thing we discussed many times. Rambam said you should want to eat pork. But we discussed, I don't know, did we discuss the OU not giving hechsher to the pork burger, the beef, beyond beef, beyond beef, we have that now all the time instead of a regular hamburger. The vegan hamburgers, they're actually quite good. So now they've developed, I don't know if it's on the market yet or it's coming to the market. It is, I haven't seen it, beyond pork. And the OU, had a whole discussion, the OU announced they're not giving a hechsher to it. Not because it's not kosher. They can't put an OU on something that says the word pork on it. So on the one hand, I totally get that. I raise it with my kids in chat. What do you think? Good, bad? It's a tough question because in the mind of many, pork. But on the other hand, the Rambam says you should want to eat pork. If God didn't tell not to pork, you should love it. Pork is great. God told me not to eat it. So that means if we can find an imitation pork, gesundheit, eat it. Make a big party with your latkes, pork and latkes, imitation pork and latkes. Well, what can be better, right? So we do the chukei ritzonecha, the mishpatim of the Torah. We do because they're right. We also do them because they're the will of God. That's hard. So okay, we need a further discussion on this, but it's the chukim that represent the will of God. It's the chukim that represent the will of God. Chukei ritzonecha, because the chukim we only do because they're the will of God. Okay, one last point. Because unfortunately, whatever. I don't know if we can discuss this next week or we have to wait until next year. We can take a vote. But I just want to end with Rav Aaron Soloveitchik's beautiful piece I heard. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, of course, Rav Soloveitchik from YU, his brother. He also taught for many years. So Rabbi Soloveitchik's son-in-law, Rabbi Rafael Marcus, Alav Shalom, was rabbi in B'nai Torah here in Toronto. I'm sure people know. So Rav Aaron used to come to Toronto on a semi-regular basis. We're going back 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, whatever. And he would often speak. He would often give a public shir. So I would go, and so he spoke once on Hanisim. And I remember, to me, maybe it's a simple idea, but I thought it was so beautiful. We thank God, Masarta Giborim biyad chalashim, the mighty, with the armor, they had the best armor. The weak, the Jews had nothing, sticks and stones. What did they have? No army. Rabim biyad matim, they outnumbered us 5,000 to 1. And so that's great. That's a real miracle. Then we say, Tameim biyad torim, the impure with the pure, and the wicked among the righteous. It's very nice. What does that do with anything? What does being righteous and being pure have to do with winning a war? I understand being few and weak. Yeah, that we thank God. This belongs in the Gemara. The purpose of Chanukah, we're pure people. What does that have to do with the war? The fact that we daven 3 times a day, who cares? It's very nice, but that's not the miracle of the war. So Rav Aaron Soloveitchik beautifully explained, and it's so true in Israel today, of course, and all our holidays are Bizman Hazeh. As we spoke last week, we don't care about the history, we care about its application. Today is that a person who's at tzaddik fights a war. The Hamas, Yamach Shemam, they don't care to kill civilians. That's their goal, is to indiscriminately fire. The Israeli army soldiers have gotten killed because they refuse to fire, because there's a kid nearby and the terrorist is hiding behind him. So a tzaddik fights a war much differently. A tzaddik will not stoop to the lowliness that our enemies will. So the Hanisim points out that it was a tremendous miracle, not just that they outnumbered us, and not just that they had a better army and better equipment, is they were fought differently. I don't know if this is historically true in the Battle of Makkum. I don't care. I thought it's a beautiful insight that represents how the state of Israel functions, and something we don't stoop. Our enemy, it's not fair. The world judges on a double standard, but we wouldn't want it any other way. We have to demand that of ourselves. It isn't fair. It's not right in the United Nations, but for us, it's right. So anyways, so that's some points on Hanisim. Let's just quickly review, and then I'll take a couple questions. Then I got to run off the chat. Okay, we discussed Hallel. Chanukah is about Hallel and Hodah, and the Chanukah, and Hallel is Chanukah and Sukkot. And the Gemara talks about it in Sukkot, and the Rambam transfers it to Chanukah and all the parallels between Chanukah and Sukkot. Beit Shammai had to light the candles. Okay, then we discuss why the distinction between how the Gemara presents the miracle and how our Siddur presents it. We discussed the Siddur. Maybe very few people knew about the miracle of the oil. That was just the Kohanim in the temple. So that wasn't a big deal. For prayers for everybody, for the Kohanim. When you learn, very few people learn. I didn't actually say that point. Learning the few people, but the prayer for everybody, that you have to discuss what's mentioned. Or I mentioned also the war is much more obvious miracle. Then we discuss prayer is how it happened. That's practical. We daven for practical things. The Siddur, the learning, what's the goal of Chanukah? The goal of Chanukah was not that we went to war. That was just a necessity to get to light and Torah and menorah and Mikdash and all the beautiful symbolism that represented. And then we discussed that the miracle of the oil whatever you think of how it happened, when it happened, probably didn't happen on the 25th of Kislev. Probably happened in Cheshvan a month earlier, but it took them a month to clean up, and then they dedicated that date. That was a special date, just like the first day of Nisan was a special date. The first time in the desert, we always do things on special dates. So they waited, and that goes back to the Torah. The Chanukah already in the Torah, and we waited, and then Chanukah got its reward later on. We discussed gratitude. Ingratitude is the first sin of Adam Harishon, and but at least he did tshuva, according to the Gemara. That after 8 days, he didn't just say, "Oh, this is the way of the world," and go on. He made an 8-day festival and in future years, they became Christmas, New Year's, pagan holiday, whatever it became. And for us, it became, doesn't say, but it seems to be the first origins of Chanukah. Then we discuss who was Yochanan Kohen Gadol. It's clear, was Matityahu the Kohen Gadol, Yochanan, whatever, just interesting. How do you phrase it? And who was this Yochanan Kohen Gadol? We know there was a Yochanan Kohen Gadol who was a Kohen Gadol for 80 years. He did good things. We didn't get into that so much. And then he became a Tzduki, went off, or is this a earlier Kohen Gadol? It's just interesting. We don't really know. Of course, we don't have good enough historic records. The academics debated, and the rabbis debated. And then we discussed Lahashkiach, the first and forgetting Torah. And then we ended with, I thought, the beautiful insight of Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, that we have to aspire to be better. It's not, we can't stoop to what other people do. Okay, let me quickly take any questions. Good morning. Yes, thank you. Number of times you say, hello, I assume this excludes Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, right? Right in the Gemara. But of course you have to say hello. I mean, that's what the Gemara says. God wanted to make, Chizkiyahu the Mashiach, but he didn't say hello. So with new things, halal is always say halal. There's also halal. If you were rescued in Entebbe, I remember that was a big discussion when I was in high school then. When the rescue from Entebbe happened, those people have to say halal every year. I would say on July the 4th, but I don't know what the Hebrew date was. But everybody knows Entebbe happened on July 4th, the bicentennial. So and when an individual miracle, that's what we call a Purim Katan. We have a lot of that in history. Purim Katan, communities would say halal when they were rescued. But halal as a national mitzvah can only happens in the land of Israel. The Gemara talks about by Purim. That's why we don't say halal on Purim. But yes, so Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim with coffee. Can I share Mark Shapiro's article? Yeah, I have to find it again. I can quickly find that. It's a little hard to find, but maybe I'll send it out in an email if people want it. I guess that's the best way. Or send me an email if you want to know. I'll respond. Rock of Ages. Yeah, I'm not sure what that's referring to. Masur. We didn't get to Masur. Masur is in many ways a Christian polemic, especially the last paragraph, but we'll have to leave Masur for another time. But talk about the persecution. Oh yeah, Masur on the tune. Yes, the tune of Masur is for sure borrowed. Somebody asked me probably, can one use a Buddhist or Hindu as a caretaker if these are considered a form of Vodazara? So I don't know enough about Hinduism. I assume we can use, I wouldn't ask my caretaker if they're Hindu or Buddhist. I don't think that's an issue. And I know with the Shaitos, what the problem years ago, I don't know. I don't know. In other words, does the Meiri apply to Eastern religions? That's your question. I don't know. I assume yes, but yeah, that's beyond my pay grade. These are things I surely don't want to consider everybody in India and whatever and the country to be idol worshippers. I don't think that's good. If we can, what can I tell you? There's a lot. Tosfot discusses that. Maybe we'll discuss that at another year. The first Tosfot in Avodah Zarah. Was it somewhere near 40,000? I don't know the number. Thank you. I don't know, but yes, many were and killed. If we take notion 18 high priests in the first temple seriously, then people stayed in cities of refuge for a long time. Yeah. Okay, assuming they had Ari Miklat. I don't know, was the Ari Miklat ever in use? It's a good question. So I know okay, good. The high priest had lived long life but had male children later in life to take over. I don't know. I just don't know. Thank you. But they gave a hechsher to pork bits now. Oh, did they? I don't know. Okay. Maybe pork, that's it. Maybe it's batal bit B'shishim, I don't know, but I don't know why they would give pork bits. I have no idea. Okay, maybe I have a series to object discuss other historic errors. Yeah, fine, but I probably shouldn't be the one to give that one. I mean, I know a little bit, but we'll have to get a real expert. A series of internal clashes and zealots, the other lots. The Hasidim and Misnakim, thank God it didn't come to arms, but they came pretty close. They put the Lubavitch Rebbe in jail. The Tosfot Yontif spent many years in jail because the other Jewish community snitched on him, famous, on the mission. There's unfortunately too much to discuss about internal things. That's why we don't have a temple. Sinat Chinam. That's the problem. Okay, bacon. Didn't they have an OU? I have no idea. Bacon flavor. I haven't had this stuff. I just know I saw an article in the paper that the OU said they're not giving a hechsher to pork beyond pork burger, whatever it's called. Okay, everybody, pleasure to see you. Have a Shabbat Shalom, a Chodesh Tov, Chanukah Sameach, triple header this week. I look forward to seeing you next week in all our shiurim. I mentioned we have one new series starting. I'll send out details on science. And with Jeremy England, the physicist, is going to talk about some of the bigger issues, not the technical issues of science and halakha. But so I'll send out information, and I want to wish everybody well and thank you for coming and have a wonderful day and Shabbat Shalom.